UK unemployed should be forced to pick fruit, ex-MP. NWES has offered a controversial response to rocketing food prices. Britons don't have an automatic right to low food prices, former Conservative MP NWES has claimed, adding that people should simply go without certain items if they are struggling financially. Discussing the UK's cost of living crisis on the BBC's Politics Live show, the former Tory member suggested that anyone claiming unemployment benefits should be made to fill labour shortages by picking fruit. Widdecombe also advised people who cannot afford to pay for some food items to simply stop buying them. Well, then you don't do the cheese sandwich. None of it's new. We've been through this before, she said. The problem is we've been decades now without inflation, we've come to regard it as some kind of given right. The cost of living has risen sharply in the UK over the past 2 years, with annual inflation standing at 10.1% in March, driven largely by soaring food prices. Although the inflation rate dipped from 10.4% in February, it fell less than expected and is still well above the Bank of England's target of 2%. Widdecombe, who also served as Brexit Party MEP, is known for her controversial comments. In 2021, she called Prince Harry and Meghan Markle professional victims and professional whingers, accusing them of wanting privacy but at the same time publicizing every detail of their lives. In 2019, Widdecombe triggered a backlash after saying that one day science could produce an answer for why some people are gay. The same year, a leaked WhatsApp conversation showed that she had used the offensive term gollywog, outdated British slang for anyone who is not white-skinned. Widdecombe defended gay conversion therapy in 2012, accusing the homosexual lobby of doing everything it could to ban it. In 2002, Widdecombe voiced support for the reintroduction of the death penalty, arguing it would save lives. Chinese-contracted energy project in Uzbekistan improves local economy. The China Central Asia Summit opened today, May 18. Over the years, the energy cooperation between China and Central Asian countries has borne fruit. The Surya Combined Cycle Gas Turbine, CCGT, power project, contracted by China Energy International Group, will be the largest CCGT independent power plant in Central Asia upon completion. This project is significant for Uzbekistan, in that it helps adjust its energy structure and enhance its electricity capacity, as well as improving the livelihood of local people by offering plenty of job opportunities. UK to probe up to 100 lawyers for helping criminals get asylum. The United Kingdom's National Crime Agency, NCA, is preparing to launch an investigation into up to 100 lawyers suspected of helping criminals get asylum in the country, Rob Richardson, the head of the NCA's Modern Slavery and Human Trafficking Unit, told British press on Thursday. So it's been well reported that there are concerns that particularly Albanian organized crime groups are frustrating law enforcement efforts by claiming that they are victims of trafficking or seeking asylum. And where we are particularly interested from an NCA perspective is how does the legal industry, how do lawyers, support organized crime groups to do that, Richardson told the newspaper. The NCA is conducting a survey at present to understand who are the high-risk agents and it's less than 100, it may well be in the 10s, he added. The NCA, which is the UK's version of the US Federal Bureau of Investigation, believes attorneys that are allied with organized crime groups help their members exploit human trafficking or slavery laws to find refuge in the UK, Richardson said. For example, criminals are specifically told what to say to police officers to look exactly like a victim in need of assistance. Between January and March, over 4,700 people applied to the UK Interior Ministry as potential victims of modern slavery, which is 25% more compared to the same period last year, according to the newspaper. Illegal migration has been a pressing issue for the UK for years and only intensified after the country left the European Union in 2020. As of March 31, there were 138,052 asylum applications in the UK awaiting an initial decision. Montana to become first U.S. state to ban TikTok. Montana Governor Greg Gianforte on Wednesday signed legislation to ban TikTok's operation in the state, making it the first U.S. state to ban the popular short video app. Montana will make it unlawful for Google and Apple's app stores to offer TikTok within the state, but will not impose any penalties on individuals using the app. The ban is to take effect January 1, 2024, and is almost certain to face legal challenges. Montana, which has a population of just over 1 million people, said TikTok could face fines for each violation and additional fines of $10,000 per day if it violates the ban. The companies offering the TikTok app in their app stores would also be fined $10,000 per violation, per day. The American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, slammed the law as unconstitutional and noted that it will go into effect on January 1 if the courts do not act. Earlier, TikTok issued a statement saying that the new law infringes on the First Amendment rights of the people of Montana by unlawfully banning TikTok, and said it will continue working to defend the rights of our users inside and outside of Montana. TikTok, which has over 150 million American users, has faced growing calls from U.S. lawmakers and state officials to ban the app nationwide over concerns about data privacy. In March, a congressional committee grilled TikTok CEO Xiao Zhichu about whether the Chinese government could access user data or influence what Americans see on the app. TikTok has repeatedly denied that it has ever shared data with the Chinese government and has said the company would not do so if asked. The calls to ban TikTok nationwide or give the Biden administration new powers to crack down or ban TikTok have not advanced in Congress. TikTok is working on an initiative called Project Texas, which creates a standalone entity to store American user data in the U.S. on servers operated by U.S. tech company Oracle. Russia remains reliable global food supplier despite sanctions, Putin. The country's agricultural exports are rising, according to the president. Russia's exports of agricultural produce increased last year despite Western trade barriers, President Vladimir Putin announced on Thursday. During a meeting with the country's agriculture minister, Putin stated that Russia had enjoyed its largest ever grain harvest in the previous crop year, of almost 158 million tons. In the current agricultural year, which ends on June 30, the country is expecting to export up to 60 million tons of grain, the president added. According to estimates by the Agriculture Ministry, Russia had already exported 40 million tons of grain as of March. In the last farming year, overall grain exports stood at just over 38 million tons. As before, our country is one of the key suppliers of agricultural products in the world, and we have established ourselves as a reliable, predictable partner, Putin noted. The country has also become self-sufficient in terms of farming and has a surplus of fish, meat, vegetable oils, grains, and sugar that can be exported, according to the Russian president. Despite the barriers to foreign trade, Russia managed to increase the exports of farming produce to $41.6 billion last year, Putin added. In 2021, Russia supplied $37.1 billion worth of farm produce to overseas customers, data from the Agriculture Ministry showed. Since 2010, the country's overall agricultural exports have increased fivefold. Moscow has been targeted by several rounds of Western economic sanctions since last year that curtailed its ability to settle foreign trade deals. However, Russia has forged new economic partnerships and has found alternative ways of carrying out foreign trade, including using national currencies instead of the US dollar and the euro. Video, 11 dead, 20,000 homeless after worst flooding in Italy in a century. Central Italy is reeling after days of pounding rain caused the worst flooding the region has seen in more than 100 years. The raging waters have claimed several lives and destroyed thousands of homes. The rains began earlier this week but intensified on Wednesday, causing 23 rivers to burst their banks in the Emilia-Romagna region and parts of neighboring March. According to authorities, some 280 landslides have been reported, with the floods and landslides together affecting 41 cities and towns. Italian Civil Protection Minister Nello Musumeci told reporters that an average of 200 millimeters, 7.9 inches, of rain had fallen in just 36 hours across the region, with localized concentrations reaching 500 millimeters, 19.7 inches, in that time. If you consider that this region averages 1,000 millimeters, 39.3 inches, of rain in a year, you realize the impact that these rains have had in these hours, Musumeci said. He also called for a new nationwide hydraulic engineering plan in response to the rise in floods and landslides in recent years. An estimated 20,000 people have been left homeless by the disaster, and so far 11 deaths have been confirmed, most of them elderly people who could not escape the rising flood waters. Firefighters have carried out some 2,000 rescue operations across the two states. The floods have affected historic cities such as Ravenna, which was once the capital of the Western Roman Empire, and Castel Bolognese, the latter of which suffered a major flood just weeks ago. 2 weeks ago we had a flood and we were left to believe it happens once every 100 years, Luca della Cadenza, the town's mayor, told reporters. The destruction has caused the cancellation of a major Formula One car race, the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, which was scheduled to happen this weekend. However, the destruction isn't limited to Italy. The same storms also crossed the Adriatic Sea, bringing torrential rains to the Balkans as well. Amin Halatovic, the mayor of the Bosnian town of Bosanska Krupa, told local media, "We have an apocalypse. We can no longer count the flooded buildings. It's never been like this." South American country pledges to abandon US dollar. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro says the move will free his country's economy from sanctions. Venezuela is planning to shift away from the greenback in cross-border transactions, President Nicolas Maduro said earlier this week, claiming that the measure would help the Bolivarian Republic to free its economy. It's the latest country to publicly share plans to reduce its reliance on the US dollar. Similar measures have recently been announced by Argentina, Brazil, and Iraq. Meanwhile, the BRICS group of nations are considering the introduction of a new reserve currency to replace the dollar. This is the path of Venezuela and the path of a free economy where currencies are not used to punish countries and impose sanctions, Maduro said on Tuesday in an interview with local media. Venezuela is ranked among the world's 5 most sanctioned nations. The South American country has suffered one of the largest economic contractions in history. Last year, Washington allowed U.S. energy major Chevron to resume limited oil production in the country, but the majority of sanctions remain in place and continue to weigh on the Venezuelan economy. Long-standing sanctions policies pursued by the White House, along with rising inflation in the U.S., have forced multiple countries around the world to start looking for alternatives to the dollar. Earlier this month, Argentinian President Alberto Fernandez and his Brazilian counterpart, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, agreed to develop a framework for using national currencies in mutual transactions. Last month, Argentina confirmed settlements for Chinese imports in yuan rather than US dollars in an attempt to safeguard the nation's decreasing reserves. In March, China and Brazil agreed to abandon the greenback in their bilateral transactions in a bid to reduce investment costs and develop economic ties between the two countries. In February, Iraq's central bank said it would allow commerce with China to be settled directly in yuan for the first time. Earlier this year, the yuan overtook the US dollar in China's international trade transactions. Moscow positive about African peace initiative on Ukraine. Moscow has a positive attitude towards African states' initiative on the Ukrainian settlement, but it needs to be studied, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Bogdanov said on Thursday. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa said on Tuesday that Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky both agreed to receive a mission of leaders of African nations with their peace initiative on the Ukrainian conflict. We need to see what ideas the African countries come up with, what proposals. Of course, you need to understand what their thoughts are, because there are many who want to organize mediation efforts, Bogdanov told reporters, noting that Moscow is positive about all the initiatives that are aimed at finding a settlement. British PM hails cheap beer Brexit benefit. Rishi Sunak claims the UK's exit from the EU is working. The UK's withdrawal from the European Union was not a failure, according to British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. who insisted on Thursday that Brexit was working. Sunak added that economic confidence is increasing and UK household incomes are outperforming forecasts. He cited cheaper beer and sanitary products as results of cutting value-added tax, VAT, and reforming duties. Economic optimism is increasing, consumer confidence is increasing, growth estimates are being raised, Sunak told journalists on the way to the G7 summit in Japan, adding that there were lots of signs that things are moving in the right direction with the economy. Earlier this week, former leader of the UK Independence Party Nigel Farage, one of the leading advocates of Brexit, said the nation had not benefited from Brexit economically. Farage blamed the failure on politicians mismanaging the departure. Sunak admitted that consumers are now struggling with record-high inflation and one of the worst cost-of-living crises in modern history, but noted that statistics on real household disposable income growth had been pessimistic, and have turned hugely better than expected. That's a very important measure of people's living standards, hugely outperforming what people thought, the Premier said. In March, the Resolution Foundation, an independent think tank, reported average household disposable income in the UK would decline by the end of 2027 to less than it was during the coronavirus pandemic. In April, the Bank of England's chief economist, Pill, said Britons need to accept that they are poorer, and advised them to stop asking for wage increases and pushing prices higher. The UK officially quit the EU on January 31, 2020 following the 2016 Brexit referendum, which the Leave vote won by a slim margin. Washington weighs possibility of sending U.S. officials to China, reports. The Biden administration is considering the possibility of organizing a series of visits by top U.S. officials to China in the coming months, in an attempt to resume interaction with Beijing, an American broadcaster reported, citing U.S. senior officials. The list of officials who might visit China shortly includes U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo and Climate Envoy John Kerry, the officials told media, adding that the priority of those trips was still unknown. Meanwhile, the visits are unlikely to take place in the next few weeks as the Biden administration is currently grappling with the debt ceiling and focusing on meetings between the U.S. president and other leaders on the sidelines of the G7 summit in Hiroshima, the report said. The potential visits are expected to defuse tensions between the two countries caused by events in February, when Blinken called off his trip to Beijing after the Pentagon detected a Chinese balloon over U.S. airspace. Washington insisted that the balloon had been sent to spy on military sites, while Beijing argued it was a meteorological airship that had been blown off course. China receives first UN-settled LNG cargo. A state-owned energy company imported 65,000 tons of supercooled natural gas from the UAE. China has unloaded its first cross-border cargo of liquefied natural gas, LNG, settled in yuan, the state-owned China National Offshore Oil Corporation, NWES, announced on Tuesday. The company said it purchased 65,000 tons of LNG from the United Arab Emirates, UAE. The move is the latest sign of the UN's growing presence on the international stage, as conditions for settling oil and gas trade in the Chinese currency become increasingly mature, NWES said. As part of its de-dollarization strategy, Beijing has been promoting settlements in currencies other than the US dollar and euro. China's attempts to move away from the greenback in international trade have accelerated against the backdrop of sweeping sanctions imposed by Western nations against Russia, a major global energy producer and exporter. Commodity trade between Russia and China has reached $88 billion in the past year, Reuters reported earlier this month. Almost all of Beijing's purchases of crude oil, gas, coal, and certain metals from Moscow are now settled in yuan, the outlet noted. China's commodity imports from Russia soared by 52% in value terms last year, with shipments of crude and fuel oil reaching $60.3 billion, Chinese customs data has shown. For now, and for the foreseeable next few years, I think the trade using RMB will predominantly be used for commodity and energy trade, predicted Chi Lo, senior investment strategist at BNP Paribas Asset Management. This is a very long-term development stretching into the coming 1 or 2, even 3 decades as more nations join the RMB bloc to reduce risks of dollar exposure, especially after they've seen what the US-led sanctions against Russia have done, he added. The proportion of Russian import settlements in yuan during 2022 surged to 23% from 4% the previous year. China grants new status to leading Russian port. Goods from northeastern provinces will begin to pass through the port of Vladivostok in June, Beijing says. China has added Russia's far eastern port of Vladivostok as a transit hub for domestic trade shipments, the country's customs agency announced on Monday. The move is intended to facilitate cross-border transfers of local goods via Russia's largest port on the Pacific Ocean. It will come into effect in June and will provide China's northeastern provinces of Jilin and Heilongjiang with access to the seaport. The new route will help save shipping time and costs to deliver goods to China's southern provinces, as well as promoting domestic trade and revitalizing northeast China's aging industrial base, according to Liang Haiming, the dean of Hainan University's Belt and Road Research Institute. The opening of the transit port will also attract more investment and business to northeastern China in the future, which will contribute to the takeoff of the regional economy, Liang said. The inclusion of the Russian port in China's trading system also reflects deepening economic ties between the two countries, which have shown continuous growth in recent years, analysts say. Trade between China and Russia hit a record high in 2022, soaring by nearly a third in the wake of Ukraine-related Western sanctions on Moscow. It has continued to grow in the first quarter of 2023, with both exports and imports surging at double-digit pace, according to data from the General Administration of China. Figures showed that bilateral trade surged by more than 43% to $73 billion between January and April compared to the same period in 2022. Ukraine conflict direct result of Biden foreign policy blunders, Iran hopes, U.S. Senator. The conflict in Ukraine is a direct result of U.S. President Joe Biden's foreign policy mistakes and his administration's attempts to secure a nuclear deal with Iran, U.S. Senator Ted Cruz said on Wednesday. We did not have to have this war, and this war was caused, directly, by the foreign policy mistakes of President Joe Biden, Cruz said during remarks at the Hudson Institute. Cruz also said the Biden administration is funding both sides of the Ukraine conflict by flowing money to Iran. Biden, he added, has put partisan politics above national security, failing to properly arm Ukraine or address cooperation between Iran and Russia. Cruz also criticized Biden for displaying weakness regarding construction of Russia's Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which resumed following Biden's assumption of office, after having been suspended under the Trump administration. The senator said halting the project earlier could have prevented Russia from pursuing its special military operation in Ukraine. UK unemployed should be forced to pick fruit, XMP. NWES has opted